So do you guys remember World War III? No, not that. I mean the game that started around 2018 and took the entire internet by storm, where everyone went crazy calling it a battlefield killer, reporting on it almost daily for a while, and then it was almost instantly forgotten about. Well, it's back apparently. As of today, was the start of the game's open beta. Now, I've played World War III well before the open beta. In fact, I was one of the very sad people that bought this game a couple years ago, and, well, the game was a little rough around the edges to say the least. To start, the game was priced at $30 US, which is a lot of money for an FPS that only has 3 maps. That's right. They were asking $30 for this thing when it only had 3 maps. On top of this, the game was horribly optimized, suffered from a lot of gameplay issues with hit detection and especially network problems, but that's not even all of it. Let's get started. So what has changed over the last 4 or so years? A lot. Back in 2018, you had the ability to customize your soldier with a wide array of different weapon attachments, skins, and even gear for your soldier. Well, now, some of those same skins come in the form of microtransactions that cost as much as, wait for it, $250. That's right, $250 for a game with an average player count of about 1,000 people. A game that hasn't even officially released yet and is constantly in and out of betas and little free-to-play periods where they'll make it free-to-play for a couple weeks or a weekend or whatever, and then it's back to being paid. So remember how before I mentioned there were only 2 or 3 maps in 2018? Well, they've had a couple of years to work on it, so there must be like loads of maps right now, like at least 8 to 10, right? Right? Despite the fact that there's been a couple of years since this game first came out, there are currently only 5 maps in the game. Technically, there's more than that for the Team Deathmatch maps, but those are only recycled from the larger Tactical Ops maps. They're literally just those maps, but smaller, but they're the same exact map other than that. So, also bear in mind that one of the maps has been in development since at least 2018, so considering that map was kind of a thing back then, there's only been 2 new maps, maybe. 4 years go by and we get 2, 3 new maps technically, and then they added microtransactions. That's all we get. 4 years, 2 new maps, or 3 new maps, and microtransactions. But wait, there's still more. So World War III used to be able to be launched directly from Steam, but now, like every other shitty modern game, they have to implement a hideous launcher that you're required to download if you want to play the game. Now, you might be thinking, well, a launcher, whatever, that's not so bad. Like I said, it's standard for a lot of modern games. But then you realize that when you download the game through Steam, Steam itself doesn't even download the actual game. It leaves that to the launcher, which will take over 2 hours to download it. Initially, I thought that this was just a bad internet connection on my part, but after a little bit of research, I found out that no matter who downloads the game, no matter how fast their internet speed is, the game still takes roughly 2 hours to download. I wonder why this is. Oh, right. So it seems that the developers purposely made their game download at the slowest rate possible because while the launcher is running, Steam still counts that as hours played. And 2 hours is the amount of time it takes before most games are ineligible for a refund should you choose to attempt to get one. So it all makes sense now. It's almost like the devs knew that people were likely to seek out a refund for their game, but why might that be? Oh, right. There are large periods of time where the game is completely unplayable. Whether it's down for quote-unquote maintenance, as the launcher will tell you, or the game is just plain dead. Like I said earlier, the average number of players for World War III comes in at about 1,000 or so people, but this is only because of the free-to-play periods that the game every so often goes to. Naturally, when the game goes free-to-play for a weekend, more people will play. In reality, when the game is paid, the daily number of players can go as low as 7 people according to Steam charts. So a multiplayer game only designed to have large-scale battles with 7 players is almost impossible to actually enjoy. And this is if you can even get a match, because for some reason, the game will often just refuse to find you one, or will boot you in the middle of a game for no apparent reason. Sometimes it even disconnects my internet. No, it doesn't just disconnect me from the game, it disconnects my computer's internet altogether, and then I have to unplug my Wi-Fi adapter and then plug it back in to get it to work, and nobody knows why. I've asked around and no one seems to know why this happens. Now, also, the game used to have a server browser in 2018, but they did away with that for some reason. And the entire UI has gone a complete overhaul, and it's not particularly great. I found myself having to press way too many buttons just to select a weapon or a spawn. Sometimes I feel like I have to click the same thing 3 or 4 times to get it to do anything. And it's really confusing and just not very streamlined at all. And this isn't the original UI that they had. In fact, the original UI they had in 2018, I remember working a lot better than this and being a lot more straightforward. But maybe that just comes down to personal preference. Not really sure. A lot of games in general today seem to suffer from this, and I don't understand why UAs are so complicated now, but whatever. Like I said, maybe it's just personal preference. What about gameplay? So, upon loading into a match for the first time in a while, I have to say the graphics in this game are absolutely stunning. In fact, all of the environments look really, really good. They all look like hyper realistic. None of that stylized, jagged edge, neon, shitty mobile game port bullshit that we see from a lot of other modern games where they tend to over stylize things for some reason. This game actually looks really good, which makes me quite a bit disappointed when I'm going to say what I've got next. The gameplay, in my opinion, is terrible. Now, this is just my opinion, so before someone gets all triggered in the comments and says, "Oh, well, that's because you just suck at the game, get good, kid," stop typing, go outside, and remember that this is just my personal opinion. If you like this game, more power to you. I'm glad you can enjoy a game even if I don't. That being said, this gameplay it sucks. The first thing I have to say is that it seems like World War III is in the midst of some kind of identity crisis in that it doesn't really know what type of game it wants to be. The maps feel very realistic, and some of them are even modeled after real-life locations, but that doesn't always make for the most fun in gameplay. Something I've heard a lot of successful game developers talk about is that a space has to be fun before it's pretty, and these spaces are pretty, but generally not too fun. You add to the map design, and the weapon physics are fairly realistic, but there's also a lot of recoil on the guns, so that would make you think that the game is going for a more milsim realism approach, but then at the same time, the time to kill is quite high for a milsim game. Most of those types of games, you put 2 to 3 shots into someone and they're dead, whereas this one, it could take quite a bit. Now, again, I know some of you might be thinking, "Oh, you need to get headshots, get good." But to that I say, why? It still doesn't make any sense. If I shoot someone 5 times in the chest with 5.56 rounds point blank, they're not going to be happy, body armor or not. It just really annoys me that it seems like I should be getting kills when I'm not, where I'm just dumping loads of rounds into someone, and yet they still kill me, and it's usually because they have like 15% health left. And the feedback on when you actually kill someone is also pretty horrible. For some reason, the game tells you every little detail when you hit something, which ends up with several little lines of text appearing every time you hit someone, so you're never really sure in the spur of the moment if the game's telling you that you hit them in the head, you killed them, you suppressed them, you got an assist for someone else killing them, or something else. I've had several times where I've fired on an enemy, and a bunch of text comes up, and I think I've killed them, but I haven't. And then they kill me, or I keep on shooting, but then it turns out that I suppressed an enemy that I was shooting at before. It's just a bit too much. I think it's too complicated, and that combined with the time to kill and the weapon damage model just makes it feel very unsatisfying. Then you have the way the aiming itself works. I've had a couple gunfights on this game where I'm aiming right at my target, where they're literally lined up 15 feet away, and for some reason my bullet will whiz right past them to the left or right. And like I said, these aren't long-range sniper fights. They're often inside the same room, but for some reason, all the guns feel really inconsistent in their targeting. If this wasn't enough, the game spawning is some of the worst that I've ever seen. In a couple of clips that I recorded for this video, I have several cases where I'll spawn, be alive for under 5 seconds, and just instantly be run over by a tank that's camping my spawn, or by some random player that seems to appear out of nowhere and spawn directly behind where I just did. And that's kind of another issue that I have. The amount of camping that this game has in it is absurd. It seems like with the broken and inconsistent weapons that just spray everywhere, the vehicles that are basically indestructible unless you have an RPG, and then just the bad spawning system that the game almost encourages people to sit in the corner and camp and just wait for someone to walk by. It's beyond infuriating. Now, the last thing I find odd and a bit off-putting with this game is the vehicles, or the lack thereof. for a quote-unquote battlefield killer that everyone once said it was, there's not a lot of vehicle gameplay. I mean, you think Battlefield, right? You think these massive maps, loads of helicopters and tanks and everything else. And while I did mention before that the vehicles are powerful, you barely really see them. They just kind of appear. In fact, most of the viable vehicles that you'd actually want to use are tied to the game's score streak system, and they require players to get a certain amount of points to call them in, which I feel like is part of the problem with, like, this game has an absurdly large skill gap, and basically the players that are already doing good continue to do good, while the players that aren't doing the best, maybe they're new, maybe they just suck like me, continue to just die over and over and over again to tanks that kill them as soon as they spawn into the world. How is that fun? There are a few vehicles that will spawn on the map naturally, but all they are like these little buggies, quads, and APCs that have absolutely no weapons on them. I often see them getting abandoned as soon as your team captures the first point, or they're just left at spawn because, like I said, they're completely useless aside from transportation. There's no reward really for capturing new points, like in Battlefield, where capturing a point basically guaranteed that your team would have a new tank, a jet, an LAV, a helicopter, something new to use. But no, the vehicles in this are almost completely tied to kill streaks, which again, just further encourages people to camp in a corner so they can farm up those kill streak points, and then they can call in a helicopter. I mean, I have a clip here where I shoot a helicopter. I get a really good hit on a helicopter with an RPG right up by the rotor. You would think that that would send it flying to the side and blowing up. Like in Battlefield, I remember getting the craziest kills in Battlefield with RPGs. And no, it doesn't kill it. It just keeps shooting me. It's like, they're super overpowered. Now, to the game's credit, I did think some of the kill streaks were cool. For instance, the ability to call in an artillery strike on your opponent's position after getting a certain amount of points was definitely a nice touch, and it kind of almost reminds me of the days of like Modern Warfare 2, the old one, not whatever that new shit is that they're coming out with, the old one, when you could call in like a Harrier strike or whatever. So that was really cool, and I kind of wish we saw that more often. But again, because the tanks are tied to the score streak system, oftentimes it's more viable to wait to call in a tank than it is to do an airstrike, and then it feels like a watered down version of Battlefield with worse mechanics. I mean, if you go and play Battlefield 4, you have all these camos for your soldier, all these skins, all these different guns, all these vehicles, and none of the bullshit microtransactions. I mean, I have to mention that again, $250, and that's just one of them. There are other microtransactions that cost less than that, but they're still costing $25, $30, $40, and like I said, all the way up to $250. It's just insane. I mean, this game seems to have been in development hell for the past 4 years, and for what they're showing us now, doesn't make sense. Also, another thing I want to add that I didn't put in the script here, I almost forgot to put it in, is for players like me who bought the game way back when, we have been mostly unable to play for like the past week because for some reason, while they've been gearing up for the open beta, the game has just been down and it won't even let us launch it. So that's pretty shitty. Having a game that you paid for, you're just not even able to launch. I mean, that's just great. Seriously, I see no reason to play this game at the moment since Battlefield 4 will regularly go on sale with all of its DLCs. You'll have like 24 maps there, and it'll be cheaper than this. Like I said, none of the microtransactions. You'll get all these skins, all these outfits, and there's people that still play that game. Now, I don't know the numbers, but I would be willing to bet that BF4 probably will have more players than this once this free-to-play thing is over. I'm thoroughly disappointed and quite frankly disgusted with World War III, as it's really a shame to see what it's become after all these years. I think that it looks really cool and it has loads of potential if they would just make the guns a little bit better, you know, redo the way the vehicles work and get rid of these microtransactions and focus on actually giving the game content. So if you're coming to this video wondering if you should buy it, my answer is a very strong no. Just wait for the IRL edition of World War III at this rate, as it'll probably come out sooner and it might have more maps. But with that, that's going to be it for me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, leave a like on it and subscribe. If you've played World War III, let me know your opinion on it down in the comments below. I make some videos on Ravenfield, Halo, and other games, so like I said before, subscribe if you want to see more of those. So that's going to be it for me. I have been Broken Circle, and as always, thank you for watching, and in the crazy world we live in, stay safe. Goodbye, guys.